So you had to imagine with the Las Vegas Raiders, with all the drama that went down with John Gruden, and then Rick Bisaccia taking over as the interim guy, that they probably needed to win at least one playoff game in order for Bisaccia to be able to keep that job as head coach permanently. And might not even have been good enough. Now, to his credit, this team, the Raiders in 2021, dealt with quite a bit. And the fact that they were still in a position in Week 18 to win and they're in the playoffs and then actually win and be able to make the playoffs and also bounce their divisional rival, the Chargers, out of the playoffs. Like, he did a good job. So I don't know how much better he was supposed to be able to do, but I could also understand that if you're looking at this from a big picture standpoint, your Raiders owner, Mark Davis, that it's very likely that you know you're going to fire Mike Mayock, which you did. You know that a new general manager coming in is probably going to want his own guy anyways. So if anything, he might have been doing a bit of a disservice to Bisaccia because he was likely only going to have part or all of 2022 before he was eventually fired and replaced anyway. So why wait? And I get that. Like wanting a new path, a new vision, a new direction for the organization. And the Las Vegas Raiders have that now. With the hiring of new general manager, Dave Ziegler. Excuse me, for those of you that follow me in wrestling, you'll get this reference. Fuck Dave Ziegler is what Raiders fans hope they're not chanting in the next couple of years. If you don't get the reference, go look up my wrestling channel and that Twitter and you will soon enough. And new head coach, Josh McDaniels. Now, in terms of the Dave Ziegler piece, it's interesting because this is a guy that comes from the New England Patriots. So obviously there is a synergy there between Ziegler and McDaniels that actually goes back to McDaniels' days in Denver as the head coach there in 2009 and 2010. He helped Dave Ziegler get his foot in the door in the National Football League as a low-ranking kind of scout executive, and Ziegler has worked his way up to now, just over a decade later, he's going to be Josh McDaniels' boss. It's funny how this shit kind of comes full circle. But when you look at Ziegler, he spent 3 years as the director of pro scouting, 4 years as director of pro personnel. 2020, he was the assistant director of player personnel. And then 2021, he was the director of player personnel for the New England Patriots. I saw something on NFL Network yesterday where they were talking about he was the de facto general manager of the New England Patriots. No. The Patriots have a general manager. That general manager is Bill Belichick. You could say with Ziegler in the role that he's in, that he had increased responsibilities to help support Belichick as a general manager. That could be a true statement, but de facto general manager, he was not. So let's stop that talking point. Now, I talk a lot about the Belichick coaching tree, and we will talk about that here in a moment. But the history of the front office guys is a mixed bag, but not all bad. Scott Pioli was, Thomas Dimitroff was good. John Robinson in Tennessee has been good. Jason Light won a Super Bowl down in Tampa. I mean, you have a disaster like Bob Quinn in the mix and Nick Caserio down in Houston. Who knows how that's going to play out long term, but it certainly hasn't started off great. But that tree isn't full of rotten fruit. So I can understand Mark Davis looking at this and saying, you know what, I want to pluck somebody from that organization, trying to go to a championship organization to build your own championship organization. I get that. And there was clearly a vision from Dave Ziegler about what he wants to do with the organization, who he's going to bring in as the head coach. Like, makes sense. And the good thing, if you're a Raiders fan, you're looking at this, you say, this is a guy, unlike Mayock, that has years of front office experience. Clearly, Mayock was in over his fucking head. Much different being a talking head on TV where your analysis doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things to the decisions that you make are vital and critical. Ziegler is much more familiar with the decision-making involved of being in a front office role in the National Football League. He's only 44 years of age, so if you get this right, you could potentially have this guy leading the way for a decade plus. And certainly sounds and appears and feels like he's the one that ultimately chose as head coach. Now, certainly, was Mark Davis looking at this as a package deal? Is that I can get Ziegler and I can get Josh McDaniels? Yes. That makes sense. But at the end of the day, the general manager, for all intents and purposes, still chose the head coach. Instead of the head coach choosing the general manager, which is what you had the last go-round. So this, on the surface, already feels like a welcome, refreshing change for the Raiders organization. Now, as far as Josh McDaniels goes, He is pretty notable, obviously, for his failed tenure in Denver from 2009 to 2010. In fact, he didn't even make it through all but, what was it? He made it through 3/4 of his second season there in Denver before he was shown the door. Now, I'd always say he traded away Jay Cutler, so he couldn't be all that stupid, but he also drafted Tim Tebow in the first round, so let's not give him too much credit here. But that was a long time ago. I'd say he's also notable for leaving the Colts at the altar in 2018. He was basically announced as the head coach and then said, nah, I'm good. Which, I think cooled a number of teams off to him, but also was maybe McDaniels saying, hey, if this situation doesn't feel right, I'm in a position where I don't have to go anywhere. And I understand that. Exercising your leverage. Life is all about leverage, and Josh McDaniels clearly has chosen in recent years to exercise his leverage, to sit there and wait. He spent the past 10 seasons and his second go-around with the Patriots as the offensive coordinator, I think 8 of those, up until the last 2 years as a quarterback's coach as well. So he had a lot on his plate. Obviously, all the work he did with Tom Brady over the years as his primary play caller. Has 6 championship rings as an assistant, so comes again with plenty of NFL head coaching experience. And I think the difference with Josh McDaniels now that might make Raiders fans feel a little more at ease with this potential selection, or with this selection, this hiring of Josh McDaniels to be the team's next head coach, is the work that he did with Mac Jones in 2021. Here's a guy who was the 5th quarterback taken in the 2021 draft, 15th overall by the Patriots. He just kind of fell into their lap. Threw for, 3,800 yards and ended up making the Pro Bowl as a rookie. The offense was 6 in points and 15 in total yards. So if you want to say, for McDaniels, all those years with Tom Brady, how much of that was McDaniels and his scheme and his system and his play calling, and how much of that was Brady, you feel a little bit better about it after 2021 because you say, hey, there was a new, young rookie quarterback that he helped put in a position where the guy could be a Pro Bowler this year. So that potentially eases some concerns about system and Brady and Belichick and so forth. That said, there have to be major questions about this hire. And even if you're talking about press conferences and McDaniels talking about learning the lessons of the past, it's important to acknowledge the mistakes of the past and talk about learning lessons, but you ultimately have to learn those lessons. And what we don't know yet, and we can't know yet, is whether or not he actually did. Only time will tell there. What did he truly learn from his Denver experience? How committed is he, when you look at that 2018 fiasco with the Indianapolis Colts? Is this a guy that is committed to the Raiders for the long term, or is the first time it gets hot, he might tuck tail and run and leave and then try to go back and work with Belichick again? Or is he going to bail on you in a couple of years if Belichick maybe retires and he fancies that New England Patriots job? Hard to know. It's a question. He's obviously a great game plan guy, a great scheme guy, great system guy, and play call guy, and does some really great work with quarterbacks. But what about leadership of the entire roster? What about leadership of the coaching staff? It's a major question. You also look at a guy like him, offensive guy that's been his own play caller for many years. Is he going to go down the right path of bringing in an offensive coordinator and allowing them the autonomy to primarily call plays? Or is he going to make the decision that a lot of other offensive-minded head coaches do, where they continue to want to be too far in the weeds and they don't have the right vision and the right focus because they're too worried about the fucking offensive game plan and they're too worried about calling the damn plays during the game? That is a question. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And even sometimes when it works, it eventually bites a team and a coach in the ass. And I think the other major question for this hire is, it's yet another branch, yet another fruit from the Bill Belichick coaching tree, which has not been good. Teams continue to pluck fruit off of the Belichick coaching tree and continue to get burned by it. Now, you probably feel better about Josh McDaniels this go-around than you did a decade ago. You probably feel better about Josh McDaniels than you do about any of the other recent notable Patriots guys that became head coaches elsewhere. But it's still a question. There is something to be said about, correlation does not equal causation, but at some point in time, motherfucker, it's a trend. And it absolutely is. But that doesn't mean that Raiders fans should totally despair, because there are absolutely some reasons for optimism here. The Raiders have Derek Carr, so there really isn't questions about the quarterback position. And especially if you're bringing in a McDaniels, you're not doing it in this context to rebuild. You're more retool, reload kind of thing. So Derek Carr gets a benefit from getting a capable, qualified offensive mind, offensive play caller, offensive quarterback coach, like all of that. That's what he gets in McDaniels. He gets somebody that he can work with and help him play some of his best football in the second half of his career. You should have the head coach and general manager in sync with approach and philosophy. These guys have a working relationship, have had for a long time, and I see no reason why that would change here. Although differences in roles now can lead to conflicts of personality and egos and so forth. McDaniels is still only 45. Denver was a long time ago. I know it is important to say that it is part of the story, but it is only part of the story. Like Pete Carroll, if you only told the story about him in the NFL as a head coach with the Jets and the Patriots, it would look terrible. But he came back with the Seahawks and he had a great run, won a Super Bowl, made it to 2 of them. Belichick failed ultimately in Cleveland for that 91-95 stretch as head coach of the Browns. He was an assistant for a few years and then came back and was a head coach a second time. You know, sometimes guys fail that first time, get a second opportunity, and they learn and they develop as coaches and as leaders, and you can bear the fruit of that. And being only 45 years of age, like this is a guy in McDaniels that could potentially be around for a long time, and that is always appealing. You want to be able to not be in a spot where you're choosing another head coach and general manager in 3 or 4 years. And at least on the surface, you're bringing in 2 guys that are in relative lockstep that you can potentially envision keeping for many years. And this is a team, a roster that made the playoffs this past season in spite of all the drama. The John Gruden crap, Henry Ruggs going drinky, drivey, David Arnett just going fucking psycho, all of that. And this team still made the playoffs with an interim head coach. You've got young offensive pieces around Derek Carr and Darren Waller. Hunter Renfrow had a great year. Josh Jacobs, Colton Miller. So the talent cupboard on offense is not entirely bare. And while they're not overflowing with cap space, they've got about $20-ish million. So that's enough to plug in some pieces or plug in some holes as you see fit. But you probably have room to get creative and add more if you so desire. You have basically a full allotment of draft pick capital this year. So it's not a bad situation. And if you're a Raiders fan, like maybe you're a little guarded about this because you're thinking about, oh my God, we're bringing in Josh McDaniels from the Patriots coaching tree, the Belichick coaching tree. That's usually a disaster. Get it. Hey, Dave Ziegler, you're bringing him in. What's that going to mean? Fair question. Especially when you talk about first-time general managers, it's hard to truly ever know. But I think for the Raiders, this was about the best you were going to do. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I'm just saying that you brought in a general manager who comes from an organization that actually, in terms of some of the front office people, there have been some good results there. So you bring that guy in with championship experience who brings in a head coach that he's worked with for a long time that also has major championship experience. And it's a notable name, and it's been a guy that's been out on the market the past couple of years, and this is a guy that has been selected in terms of the opportunities he's pursued or not pursued, and McDaniels ultimately envisioned the Las Vegas Raiders being a good fit for him. We will see how this works out, but in terms of this process and the way it was managed and handled, I give Mark Davis credit here. I don't know that he could have done much better. I certainly know he could have done a lot worse.